Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season finale of Doom Patrol, as well as the latest episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Like always, if I'm talking about something you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include a time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So, for example, if you want to hear what I say about the season finale of Doom Patrol, you can skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But the first thing I want to talk about is the season finale of Doom Patrol. A great season finale. A lot of interesting things went down. Obviously, immediately picking off where the last episode left off. It's like, wait, what? You did this to us. Like, wait, what? Everyone's still kind of dealing with the shock of it. Obviously, Jane took it the hardest because out of anyone, Niles was kind of the most important. She knew that there was definitely something up there, but she still wasn't 100% sure because obviously everything was like that home that, you know, the original Doom Patrol was in and everything. So it's like, okay, so what's going on in that area of things? And it's like, understanding why she was originally going to be put there by Niles and everything, but nevertheless, it's kind of interesting because, you know, Mr. Nobody sends them away because it's like they were just kind of icing on a cake, like messing with them and everything, you know. I mean, what happens to a family, you know, a group of heroes like this who consider themselves a family when they realize that basically they're the foundation that this family they built for themselves, it's kind of based off of lies and about a man who lied and made them into the freaks that they are. It's kind of interesting because the parallels that they draw between Mr. Nobody and the Doom Patrol, in the sense of this Doom Patrol, is the sense of like, oh, he created them just like he created, you know, it's like you destroyed them like you destroyed Eric Morden and, you know, made me Mr. Nobody. And it's like, that's what this was all about, him getting his revenge. And I do like, because basically it's been like 6 months, everyone's kind of split off, kind of doing their own things in certain regards. Larry and Rita are still kind of a package deal. Kind of makes sense considering the fact is they were the first ones in the Doom Patrol manner, and also kind of have that same similarity of thinking of like, oh yeah, like we're the ones that don't get involved. Obviously, Larry's still kind of processing everything, but Rita, she's moving on. She's got students. She's teaching like an acting class or whatever, you know, to high schoolers and stuff like that. She's kind of embracing it. She's like, oh, she's so happy about it. Like I said, Larry's trying to figure things out. Like him and the negative spirit have been, you know, spending time of like practicing, like the whole thing of like the negative spirit leaving him. Obviously, him still staying conscious and stuff like that. But it's like, okay, I'm good. Like, you know, it's like, oh, let's get up to like 20 seconds or whatever, which is pretty interesting. And seeing him going like negative spirit release, like I guess that's him kind of doing it more so on his own, like rather than, I guess, like the spirit kind of like, if the spirit kind of forces its way out, then it's kind of a situation of then he'll pass out. But if he's doing it willingly and focusing on it, then he won't pass out. So I guess that's what kind of how that whole situation works. And poor Rita, she's putting on in front of that acting class and stuff like that. And I love that she does this scene with the student and she does it her way and kills it. And the student, the dude she's working opposite of, kind of covers himself because it's like, yeah, I guess I can understand it because I was like, oh, that's getting a little sensual just the way, you know, Rita's doing it. But like that student Esme, I was like, she's I mean, to be fair, kids, teenager, they're all assholes, and she's tearing like into Rita, being like, oh, the fact of the matter is how pathetic she is, that blah blah blah. She, you know, you're teaching at this class that everyone only simply taking for an easy A. It's just like, you know, and the thing is, Rita didn't shift. Like, she kind of kept herself composed. So I guess for her, it's like, I guess that in itself is progress. I mean, granted, later on she went to heavy drinking because it's like literally got torn apart by a 13-year-old girl. So it's enough to break anyone's self-esteem. It's like, man, once again, kids and teenagers in general are assholes. But nevertheless, do you have Cliff and Jane's situation? I like that Cliff is, his big thing is just him constantly checking on Jane. You would think out of anything, well, for him, I think he kind of, where his story left with him and Clara, I think that's as far as he wants to take it. It's like, I'm not going to jump into her life. I helped her in whatever way I could, you know, but I have no place in her life. So, you know, but I can be here. I can be helpful to Jane, which obviously, once again, Jane's taking this the hardest. She actually visits Joshua, and it's like, you know, obviously at different points, different, you know, personalities are taking over during the situation. It's kind of interesting, like, you know, for him, it's like, oh, I knew what was going on. I knew what he did. And it kind of already seemed like that was the case because we saw, like, that kind of haunting, you know, during the Doom Patrol episode, Doom Patrol episode, we saw him kind of being haunted by his fears, and it was kind of Niles and everything, so it's like, okay, so you kind of understand, like, you know, there was definitely that there was definitely more to Joshua's role that we weren't really being informed about. I mean, you know, prior to now and everything. So it is kind of interesting, the medication that is basically that drug that's like an opiate. Apparently it's like a metahuman thing. I thought that was kind of interesting. It's not an outright cure for metahumanism. It's more so like a temporary bandage to a certain extent. And I guess it helps in Jane. I wonder what it would do to any other metahuman, but in Jane's specific case, obviously it kind of like quiets the voices, because she just needed it quiet. It's just, she wanted everything to be quiet and peaceful, because like basically everyone's been unrestful ever since those circumstances. It kind of threw her and everyone, but you know, once it throwing Jane into turmoil, I guess kind of throws everyone into turmoil, because she's kind of like the main personality that kind of like exists topside. So she goes a little wild and it kind of causes problems for everyone else. She was only supposed to take it in smaller doses, but she's obviously like, you know, trying to deal with it whatever way she can. So she takes it and everyone kind of goes quiet. It's just kind of like no more other voices. Everyone, all the personalities hush. Even Kay herself comes out and just goes like, oh, and she lays down. But it took other personalities, like one of her personalities being like, no, this isn't healing. You even have Kay kind of walking off because she hears their dad's voice. And, you know, Hammerhead goes after her because I think it's like like it kind of leaves you like foggy and kind of a little high and everything. And Kay's mind is being blocked off by being like, oh, no, like who's calling me? But it's like she doesn't remember because like her mind is foggy and stuff like that. Because that's the whole point of like protecting Kay from that. But she was kind of wandering towards it. Nothing really came about that, but you know, so it seemed like Hammerhead probably got to her beforehand. But, you know, it's kind of that situation of like, oh, you know, in her mind, it's like, oh, we're safer like this. But it's like, no, it's that situation of you trying to heal this way just puts us all in danger. In particular, it puts Kay in danger because it leaves her vulnerable because we're not there to do our job. Luckily, Hammerhead kind of snapped to it a little bit, you know, even though, you know, Jam was still kind of in her haze and everything. So, once again, it's just like the craziness and, you know, and just amazingness that is like how the underground operates, how Jane operates, you know. I kind of skipped over it a little bit, but I do appreciate that basically at different points, like during each member's, like, you know, you kind of see Niall's situation, his part to play in everyone's situation. The only person we never directly saw was Rita's situation, because by the time we got introduced, like obviously we started with Larry's situation, like obviously this is him, this is Niles when he was at the ant farm, you know, working with the Bureau of Normalcy, and it's like, oh, everything is being calculated, make sure that, oh, Captain Trainer goes through all that situation, and it's like, yep. So it's like, it's crazy how much they plan for things to kind of operate. I mean, obviously we kind of learn later on that not everything kind of went according to plan, but I'll get to that in a second. But I thought it was kind of interesting of like, yeah, they already had Rita, and even Joshua was like, isn't that enough? But for Niles, it's like, no, like another subject is better than having just one. And so it turns into a whole thing of like, you know, obviously Joshua feeling regret about like what we're doing, like aren't we crossing a line, like what's the, you know, there has to be like an alternative. But Niles was kind of like, no, there isn't. You know, for him it's like, I can't, like the only reason why I am able to sleep at night is because you don't tell me anything. And he's like, oh, there, you're welcome, and kind of leaves it at that. I mean, it's already bad enough he's doing it to Rita, but then automatically, you know, doing it with, you know, Larry too. And it's sadder too, because it's like the whole situation is like, obviously like him and Larry and Rita, they're having fun, like obviously going, you know, it's like, oh, New Year's Day or whatever is going from 76 to 77, and they're kind of, you know, having fun and everything. And then he gets visited by Forsyth. Now that was kind of interesting too, like, and this kind of shows you how cold Niles is. And, you know, even Kip had said this, and I thought that was kind of interesting. I'm like, oh, he's not the Niles that you really think you know. And it's like, we kind of see that. He was so cold-hearted by being like, oh, yeah, Forsyth can get Larry, do whatever he wants to. Once he gets bored of his toy, then we'll get him, and then, you know, we can handle things on our way. It's like, Jesus. It's just kind of like, oh, yeah, like treating Larry more like a thing that can be passed around, like not even like he's a person or a human, you know? Then, like, we find out, I guess, maybe specifically, I guess he was looking for someone a long time ago, like at least 10 years prior, like when he was still with the Bureau of Normalcy. I think by the time we catch him with Larry and, well, no, because I think even with everything else kind of playing out, kind of shows that, oh, that's still kind of his main priority, his research and stuff like that. So I was about to say, like, oh, him having fun with Rita and Larry, that maybe that was real, but it's like, no, that was still kind of orchestrated as well to a certain extent. It's like the, you know, keep them essentially docile, not realizing that keep them from realizing that they're lab rats in an experiment. But obviously, like, he had put in a request with the Bureau looking for someone specifically kind of like Jane. And then it goes like, oh yeah, him rescuing Jane. It's like, oh, that rescue, even rescuing Larry from the ant farm, and like, oh, that was orchestrated. Like, oh yeah, like Larry's like, oh, I knew I'd get my hands on you eventually. Jane, it's like, oh, I put this request in years ago, but now it's like, oh, it's kind of come around. All right, I'll take advantage of this situation. So it's like, it just makes everything shitty because it's like you didn't save anyone. Even the whole situation with Cliff is heartbreaking because it's like, oh, things weren't supposed to go like that, and that makes Niles regretful because it's like, oh, like it was just supposed to be him, like the crash that happened on the course that was supposed to knock him out, kill him. That was what that accident was what's supposed to take him out, not what happened later on, which led to his wife getting killed as well as his daughter being without both parents. So he actually kind of regretted it, but it didn't stop him in any shape or form, you know. And he even told Vic's mom everything, and then you kind of see everything with Vic. And he's being like, oh, you know, this is what, you know, Eleanor, oh, I was so fond of her, but I know that this is what she'd want. Even before the conversation continued, I'm like, you're so full of shit. Like, because before we had learned last episode that, like, you know, Silas was like, oh, it was actually Niles who suggested that I save you instead of your mom. And it's like, now it's like, even if he did in some shape or form meant it in a very like, no, this is the right thing to do, it comes off being like, oh, you told Eleanor some stuff that you know, oh, why not just let her die with your secrets? Like, you kind of regret telling her, and maybe after that point, she had distanced herself from him, and he was worried, like, oh, she'd tell everything that he was up to and all he had done. Because I'm guessing what he told her was everything he had done up to that point. So basically everything from Rita to Cliff, I guess that was supposed to be, like, what he ended up telling her, and, you know. And I was like, you know, and it almost makes it seem like you're covering your own ass. But even Silas is like, oh, don't give me all this, like, because he's like, oh, the fact is your son's going to need special care, this and that. It's like, don't try and sit there and talk about compassion and family and all that stuff. It's like, my wife, Eleanor, told me what you did. And you want to think like what I did to, you know, Vic is the same thing. It's like, it's not. I did what I did out of love. I turned my son into a freaking nature out of love. What is your excuse for doing what you did? It's like, never talk to me about compassion and stuff like that again. Maybe that's what set things differently for Niles. Maybe it made him kind of reassess a lot of aspects about himself, especially his relationship with his experiments. I don't know. Maybe that day forth, it kind of shifted everything for him. And it's just kind of interesting to kind of think about that, like, the heaviness of that all. But I do love that when it is all said and done, like, music playing kind of brings everyone together. I love that whole situation with Rita being like, oh, maybe it's old man Arnold, maybe he hears it. Hear what? Never mind, have a good day. What was it he said? What was it, like, go fuck yourself, Ginger, or some shit like that? I'm like, okay, he's an asshole. They meet up with Cliff and Jane, Cliff has been bringing her food the entire time, and she's like, wait, that's you that's been doing that? He's like, yeah, I mean, but, you know, I did that just because there happens to be, like, a food truck nearby. You know me, I'm super busy. It's like, no, it seems like watching over Jane is all he's been doing for the past 6 months. But I do like that Jane's like, you hear that music? You want to fuck up whoever playing it? He's like, fuck yeah. And, you know, Vic doesn't seem like he's been full-blown superheroing. He's kind of been hiding out because I think everything that, you know, the whole Mr. Nobody think of, like, oh, him still potentially going wild and hurting people, I think that nightmare still haunts him. And so he's afraid to kind of get out there and help people because I think he's afraid, like, oh, I might snap and end up killing some innocent person. So he's still doing the hero thing, but he's not doing all up and personal. He's not leaving the house to do it. He's kind of making sure everything's done from the house. But the music draws everyone in, and it's like, oh, there's Niles and everything. So it turns out, and we finally get an understanding of why Niles has done everything that he's done. This is all, because at first it's like, oh, this is about the woman. And I guess it, like, everything related to Mr. Nobody, which I'll circle back to, kind of started off about, like, oh, the her he was wondering about was her. I'm assuming it dealt with the hairy woman we got introduced to a couple episodes ago, or was it always about his daughter? I'm assuming it's a hairy woman, but maybe it has always been about his daughter. You know, at the time, with the context and everything, it made it seem like it was about the hairy woman, but no, it turns out it's about his daughter. But I'll get to that in a second. I do like that no one, you know, obviously everyone has a reluctancy to get involved, but obviously their situations make them want to. Like Jane, I think it's like, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for Danny, who's in trouble, as well as your daughter. Like Cliff was kind of like a no. Why would I help you with your daughter's situation? Because you can't help me with my daughter's situation. But, you know, you have, you know, Rita being like, I was a terrible person. And the only time she doesn't feel like a terrible person is when she gets mixed up in all, whatever you want to call all this foolishness, when she's kind of attempting to do the all hero thing. That's the only time she doesn't feel like that piece of crap person. You know, she feels better about herself. And she's like, so Larry, and he's like, does it even matter what I have to say? And she immediately goes, Cliff, and it's like, apparently not, because Rita's just going to drag you along anyway. And Cliff is like, well, now I have to go, because if I don't go, I'll be the one asshole that didn't get inside the fucking painting, so let's go inside the fucking painting. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But kind of circling back, I love, like, obviously this is all about, like, yes, he did it. Mr. Nobody won. He got his revenge. He's like, oh, this is going to last forever. And then he proceeds to get drunk. I love it. And he's just kind of being all sad and stuff like that because the feeling didn't last forever. And then lo and behold, who pops up? Freaking Ezekiel the cockroach, which I didn't realize this at the time. It's voiced by Curtis Armstrong, the actor who, interesting enough, like most recently he popped up on the TV show Happy. He played Doug. And obviously you know him as Metatron from Supernatural. I didn't realize that was him. I might have picked that up before, but maybe forgot. Either way, it's interesting because obviously Kip is played by Mark Sheppard, who played Crowley in Supernatural, so just connections like that. But he's like, oh, the fact is, you're going to bring about the end of the world. It's like, you failed twice. Well, you tried twice to bring this world to the brink of destruction, but here I am now. Oh, I'm skipping over everything that was great about that bit, too, about, like, you know, him and his pity party, because he's reading something that's basically a review of the show and stuff like that. And the fact is, it's got, like, Cliff on the front, and it's, like, the worst show ever or something like that. And he's talking about, like, oh, it's terrible plot line. And the fact is, like, it's villain that's, I forgot what the exact terminology they use, that basically he had some, like, pointing out the fact is he's just such a bad villain that, you know, he's got like a terrible, just generic revenge plot. He's like, they're right, you know. So for him, he's trying to, like, thinking up like how he, you know, he's gonna fix all this. And, you know, I love that him being like, yeah, well, this whole, you know, when he's talking to Ezekiel, it's like everything he was doing is more so like supposed to be kind of like a personal tale of revenge, you know, good for cable television. And then lo and behold, it's like, oh, let's work together to make this happen. And it's like, yes, what was it? It was like, basically, I will have my revenge again, this time for real. And it's like, I will get Niles again. And I love it. It's like, you know, Ezekiel's like, oh, I know just a guy to kind of bring into this squad. You know, he messed with a robot and everything. It's like, oh, Admiral Riskers? I love that guy. And snaps it, you know, kind of pops into the white space. And I love it. And it's like, oh, who are we? We're the Trinity. We're the Brotherhood of Dangerous Animals. I kind of get the feeling like that's probably a real thing in the comic books. I wonder, is that supposed to be like the opposite? Is that supposed to be like the Brotherhood, like equivalency to like the Wonder Pets, like Crypto and Streaky? That's what I'm curious about. That's where my mind immediately goes, but I love that. Literally working with a rat and a cockroach to get his revenge. But sadly, it didn't work out for him, because it's like, oh, let's go inside the painting where Danny is, and things are kind of run amok, and, you know, Ezekiel and Whiskers have kind of taken over and have kind of kicked him out of the Brotherhood, because for him it's like, oh, I've come here and I've become like a husk of my former self, because, you know, Niall's daughter is the one that kind of is in control a little bit, because now those two are like massive things and he's just kind of there. The Beard Hunter kind of like fell apart because he's the reason why, you know, Mr. Nobody knows anything at all. So it's like, oh, he promised me like ZZ Top beer and Da Vinci's beard, and it was just, oh, it's so tasty and so good. It's like, it's so interesting how they tie that back, considering the fact is that he was so adamant and being done. It's so interesting too, kind of in a retrospect. I guess that's what ended up happening. Like, I was wondering like how that whole thing worked out. Maybe because Niles wasn't necessarily in this world or existence, like this plane, this dimension, so that when he went looking for Niles, maybe he came across Niles' daughter, and that's what that whole situation was when we last saw him before he popped up last episode in on Danny. So that makes me wonder, is that what that was, or was that actually his daughter's hair and this thing? I'm assuming it's just because she has a connection to Niles, so maybe because Niles wasn't around, she was the closest thing energy-wise, just, you know, everything wise closer to Niles, so maybe that's why he kind of got confused and he came looking for Niles, but it was a whole thing set up by her because everything was there. Because I was wondering about, you know, because it seemed like, I think that was kind of like a, oh, this is supposed to protect her. It wasn't leading him to Niles, it was leading him to Niles' daughter Dorothy. We'll kind of get to that later, but I just thought the whole thing was fascinating, and everything that they're doing, their plan they're enacting. It's like, oh yeah, you have Cliff not being attacked by the roach, but Whiskers eating him, and you know, while he's inside of Whiskers being like, I don't deserve this. Whiskers, he doesn't understand Whiskers, but Whiskers is like, oh, you killed my mom and stuff like that, but you know, it's like, I don't deserve this. I was a shitty dad, I was a shitty husband, but given another chance, I know I could do better with Clara. It's like, I don't deserve this, I don't deserve this. You have Cyborg, like, I love that. Well, you have Rita kind of giving Mr. Nobody a pep talk, because for him it's like, oh, they've both been kind of beaten down by little girls. Obviously, like, a little girl and a rat and a cockroach just swept, you know, Mr. Nobody off his feet. And then Rita kind of, yeah, I kind of got kicked down by a 13-year-old girl. It's like, yeah, we both suck. But for her, it's like, I'd rather be a nothing than a nobody. No, I'd rather be a nobody than a nothing. I completely switched that wrong. But for her, it's like she's trying to get him, like, you know, kind of to nut up. It's like, kind of get into your narration bag, and we're going to handle this situation. And I love it. And him narrating everything. And, you know, Cyborg getting eaten by the cockroach, by, you know, Ezekiel. Rita having to do it. And I love her being, like, saying the line from, like, her... the scene she was running earlier at the school, and then also being like, oh, this is going to be worse than a donkey, isn't it? I'm wondering, probably, I don't know, I'd assume it'd probably be worse than a donkey, but nevertheless, then there's the whole situation of like, oh, what about Cliff? And it's like, you have Mr. Nobody being like, oh crap, oh, okay, I got this. He's like, I'm just vamping here. And he kind of create like a love story between Ezekiel and Admiral Whiskers. And it's just like, this is so fucking weird. What was that word he said? All right, Mr. Whiskers, no, Admiral Whiskers was like, I'm gonna spread you like the plague, daddy. I was like, oh my fucking god, this show's so weird. I love it. And then they start heavily making out and stuff like that. It's just like, oh man, this is crazy. And I just love that this whole thing being narrated. And then it's like, oh, lo and behold, you have him being inside. Because at first I was like, what's the big idea? Why does it matter if he's inside of the cockroach or not? And then it was like, all right, because the whole thing was like Mr. Nobody was playing it up, being like, oh, you're a god and everything. You are a god, because the fact is you can survive a nuclear blast and stuff like that. It's like, right, they're trying to use Larry, and I'm like, right, that nuclear energy from him and a cockroach being the only thing to survive, a rat wouldn't be able to, so Cliff would be kind of screwed in that department. So that was kind of interesting. I did like how that was operated. Basically, the negative spirit, like, tore open kind of a dimensional rift, you know, in between, you know, so they have a path to escape, and then Larry uses the nuclear energy to kind of blast it open and kind of free them from the painting and everything. A lot of interesting other things to kind of note about that situation too. One is the whole situation with that it's kind of interesting. Obviously, Jane's the one kind of sent to get, you know, his daughter, you know, Dorothy. Obviously, there's parallels there. We don't actually get to see her face, but I guess, because part of me was wondering when we kind of saw her hand and everything, I was like, are we going to see something crazy where it turns out she looks exactly like Kay or something? I thought that's where we were going to go with it, but it didn't necessarily seem like that. Maybe it's a situation where they just didn't cast a character necessarily because they weren't 100% sure what they wanted her to look like. Maybe that wasn't something set in stone, because the only time we see her is like from behind, so it's like, you know. So, but it's like, obviously Jane's in that complicated situation of like, I think, you know, because she was almost in that role herself when it comes to Niles, so it's just like, there's a lot of meta to that situation, so I think that's kind of interesting that lo and behold she's there with Niles and his daughter. I But I love that the Beard Hunter is like, okay, when it was all said and done, he's like, yeah, but what about us? They're safe inside a cockroach. And then you have Mr. Nobody being like, oh shit. And then blam, they get blasted out. And Ezekiel's giving his speech. Oh yeah, like the fact is nothing can stop me. And then bam, gets cut open and everyone walks away safe. And it's like, ha, Larry's the only one that's normal size. Everyone's kind of stuck cockroach size. And then we see that Beard Hunter and Mr. Nobody are stuck inside a painting. Now that's interesting, because I was wondering, I was like, are we setting Mr. Nobody up to potentially be a hero? So it's like, oh. But I guess not. Like, where he goes from here, like, I doubt anyone's going to go necessarily in there to get him out of the painting. But it's definitely going to be interesting where the team would go, just because, like, well, they had their complicated relationship with Niles. It's so interesting because obviously they had to face a lot of the worst nightmares last episode with Mr. Nobody. And so it almost felt like they won, but then they kind of had to still go back and deal with a lot of, well, their baggage was more so like what Niles did to them. So at the time of me recording this, I'm kind of unclear whether or not the show is coming back for a second season. Some stuff makes it seem like the show was already kind of set up and renewed for a second season before it aired, kind of like a similar thing to Titans. And other stuff is kind of making it seem like it's still up in the air because of like the whole Warner Brothers streaming service situation. But regardless, I don't know. Other things that kind of, other articles I'm coming across, because I'm not trying to read too much because I don't want to know too much, but I'm like, it seems like other things are kind of making it seem like it's clear that it is coming back for a second season. So I'm going forward with the assumption that it is coming back for a second season. I mean, from what I've heard generally, just from the places here and there, like across the internet, it seems like the show has gotten pretty positive reception, so that's pretty a good sign, I think. But you know, I'm really hopeful for a second season. You know, like I said, I'll go along with the assumption that there is one. So I'd be so curious to see what they do with the second season, because I do know, I think when it comes to the Doom Patrol, like some of the stuff I've been reading, like, this isn't the only Doom Patrol team. Like, there are others. I think when I was reading a little bit too, like Robot Man Cliff is kind of the only character that is consistent amongst all the teams. So maybe we kind of expand and bring in other characters, or maybe we keep with this group of misfits. I'm fine with keeping our little group of misfits. I'd love to see what season 2 would deal with. It's so interesting that things are such a definitive ending. I mean, granted, like I said, the Beard Hunter and Mr. Nobody are still inside the painting, so it's not like that's completely closed, but everything else has pretty much been resolved. Obviously, the Bureau of Normalcy is still an issue, but obviously there's everything about Dorothy, because like the whole point was like, because I forgot to talk about it earlier, but that was why he wanted them to all, like, they experimented on them. I mean also talk about that too, that I thought was so fascinating, because it's like, oh, they're all, like, because I always wondered, like, how is it that they just all happen to, like, have immortality, with the exception of Cyborg. I don't know if Cyborg necessarily ages. Like, I think his machinery would need to be updated every once in a while, but eventually, given enough time, it just fall apart. But generally, I think to a certain extent, he kind of has an extended longevity type of life too, but everyone else kind of has immortality. Now we kind of know why, because he was trying to find a way to extend his own life, because he's trying to live at the very least long enough, one day longer than his daughter, because his daughter's very dangerous. What that necessarily entails, maybe that's why he needed Jane, because of everything that she's capable of. She might be the only one that could potentially deal with her. So maybe it's like, in the eventuality he ever needed her, he probably wanted to stash her away, but then it was kind of like I'm gonna keep her around. I figured it had to have something to do with the fact that he needed them as kind of like some defense force. But it turns out that's not 100% the case. Maybe in Jane's case it was, but everyone else, well, Jane included, but everyone else's main thing, it's like, oh yeah, immortality was kind of the thing he was going for. I was wondering about that too, because it did seem like the Chief didn't age either, so that's what I was wondering about that. I'm also curious about, like, Dorothy's mom. Like, when did he circle back around and find out he had a daughter? Like, I guess at some point after he returned to what was at the time, well, by the time he went back, it was the Bureau of Normalcy at the time, not the oddities anymore. But nevertheless, you know, questions like that still kind of remain. Obviously, a big thing too is, like, going forward, what will their relationship be like with the Chief? They dealt with a lot of their issues this season, but, you know, what about Cliff and his daughter? Like, their relationship. Because everyone else's stories kind of close off on a note where it's kind of like their baggage is kind of being wrapped up. And Cliff's, like, he wrapped it up to a certain extent, but I still feel like there's room for that, potentially, especially his daughter finding out the truth of, like, oh, you're alive, you're a robot now. So, like I said, I'd be very interested to see what a second season would have in store for us, what kind of craziness will the Doom Patrol face off against what the next villain would be like. And now moving on to this week's episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Another great episode. A lot of interesting things to break down about this episode, so let's get to it. Obviously picking up immediately where the last episode left off, where it's like, oh yeah, the crew gets there just as Fitz and Enoch are leaving, and it's just like, you know, and it's that whole situation of everyone kind of being pissed, like Piper and Davis are like, we need to kind of lock her up. The fact is, we're so low on supplies, and you decide to do something like this, and you know, it's like, yes, the mission is to save Fitz, you know, Daisy agrees with that, but the fact of the matter, she's like, I'm the captain in this situation, so you doing what you did is a big no-no. The fact is, I'm the one that decides what we do, and the fact of the matter is, we are not well prepared, because the fact of the matter is, it's like, we care about Fitz, you act like we don't. We literally went to a fire planet for you to try and find Fitz. The fact of the matter is, we're not well equipped for this situation, so let's, you know, so we're going to try and find our way back to Earth. But she's like, fine, if that's going to be the case, I'm going to stay in. And she's like, yeah, you think that's how it's going to go, but it's not. Like, I'm the one in control here. And it's like, if you kind of are disobedient, we'll just like throw you in a brig or something like that. And Simmons is like, I'd like to see you try. It's like, whoa. I mean, to be fair, it's like, you know, it's like, once again, it's like the whole cosmic thing that kind of keeps them apart and everything. So, of course, they're going to try. She's going to fight tooth and nail to find him. It's also interesting, just immediately, just those interesting little things where it's like the guy that's kind of inspecting their ship, he plays Glenn in the Blacklist, which, interestingly enough, one of the stars in the Blacklist is James Spader, who was Ultron in Age of Ultron. When you, that just, it makes me go like, oh, that's so funny. That's how I look at it. That's just me. I just thought that was kind of fascinating. I was like, hey, it's Glenn. But nevertheless, but it's interesting. Many different things. Obviously, you have Enoch and Fitz getting robbed. They lose all the snails and they get like a little chip, you know, as currency, kind of like, you know, some money, but not the money they were promised. And they get the ship taken from them, so now they have to go gamble, and now that's really interesting. We learned a lot about Enoch this episode. It's kind of interesting, too, because like we learned a bit about Enoch last season, but I think this is going to be the real season to like really get to know Enoch, because, I mean, obviously I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but it seems like who he is, him and his species are going to play a big role this season. So it's going to, like I said, I'll get to that soon enough, but I do love them kind of going gambling, and obviously Enoch saying this line of like, oh, I think, you know, the fact of the matter is, despite everything that's kind of happened subsequently, the adventure we've been on for the past year after someone attempted to kill us, it's actually kind of been pretty interesting. And then Fitz is like, wait, are you trying to tell me you've had fun? He's like, basically, yeah. And I'm like, that's so weird. He's like, I even think that you're my best friend. I'm like, oh, that's so sweet. And Fitz is like, doesn't really answer. But truth be told, it's like, well, because Fitz doesn't know, but Enoch sacrificed his life so that everything would play out the way it's supposed to, or trying to, you know, save the future. Like, Enoch sacrificed himself so that they could get back home, you know? And that's the sad situation of it. Like, I mean, for him, he doesn't know that yet, but, you know, which almost makes that whole situation, well, it kind of plays in, well, I'm going to go ahead and talk about it. Basically, there is a hunter after Fitz and Enoch, and it turns out it's a Chronicon, Jesus, sorry. Because obviously, you know, for Enoch, he's like, the fact of the matter is there are different varieties. And for him, he's all about research. He's an anthropologist, but also sensual gratification is kind of another angle in this whole situation. Because I love that, well, I love that. It's like, oh, yeah, they're on a winning streak and everything, and it's like Enoch is winning, he's killing it, but then he kind of gets a little ahead of himself because he's very good at calculating like how to play the games and stuff like that, probability and stuff like that, because he's basically kind of like a supercomputer, but because of being Chronicon, he's able to kind of mimic like his insides rather than kind of being, because he's like, I'm not a robot or an android. The fact is, but I can synthetically make myself seem on the inside more like a human to fool any scanner, but and I love Fitz being like, we're best friends, right? So let's. It's just so crazy to think, like, yeah, we're going to like do a little bit of gambling to get the money we need to kind of get where we need to go. And they love the whole situation of, you know, when winning and stuff, but Enoch, you know, not being able to read people, not knowing bluffs and everything, ends up losing all their money. And it's like, Enoch's like, well, there is another way. We can go to the brothel. And then, like, it fits me like, wait, what? He's like, well, Enoch's like, well, the fact is we're both not half bad looking. Plus, I, you know these 130, and, you know, Fitz stops him immediately like, no, brothel is literally out of the question. But he's like, well, there's another option. He's like, why didn't you leave with that? Well, because it's super dangerous. But it's like, Fitz, I'm sure, like, the brothel angle is like, yeah, if I did that, he's like, Gemma would kill me. So, like, let's super not go down that route. So I love that. Because even later on, Simmons is like, oh, I hope, you know, for his sake, he is dead. And it's like, wait, why? Because, I think imagining him at the brothel, either the fact is just like, oh, how pissed she'd be off, and then I interpret that as like, if he's at that brothel, I'm gonna kill him type of situation. That, you know, that's how I interpret it. Maybe that's not how she meant it, but that's how I took it. But I love that whole situation too about Kitson too, because it's the whole thing of like, oh, Kitson, like, no decency and all this other stuff, and then you have Piper making a joke being like, oh, sounds like someone just described Florida. I'm like, poor Florida, always getting shit on, dude. But also the fact is, it's like, you know what they say about Kitson, what happens on Kitson, and Daisy's like, stays on Kitson, and he's like, no, it's contagious and burns, and just everyone's kind of looking like, oh, ew. Because even at one point, he's like, Kitson comes from the name of, like, it sounds like the sound an animal would make when it's in heat or something like that, and Davis is almost kind of like, gotta look at us like what? Wait, what? I just love that whole situation. This is like just like an overall, just like a fun episode. Like, obviously there's serious aspects to it, but it's just overarching fun. I kind of went on a huge tangent and everything, but kind of going back to the Chronicons, I think it's so interesting. The moment he was like, the fact is, it's like, you guys are out of time. And I was like, oh, like, what does that mean? And then he makes a reference to the fact is fit, and like, it started piecing it together. It's like, oh, like, he upset the balance of the universe or something like that. Essentially, his crime is messing with the universe. And I'm like, wait, is this about Fitz being alive but technically dead? It totally turns out to be that case, because he's throwing the cosmos out of balance, because he shouldn't be alive, because he died in the past, but yet because of time travel and stuff like that, technically he's still alive in this universe. So obviously, like, they kind of exist, I guess, to, you know, keep some sort of balance. Like, I think it must have like some cosmic ramifications for him being alive. It just kind of throws the universe a little off balance, and they've noticed it, and I think they're trying to correct it. Like, I don't know how they, because if they were going to kill him, they would just straight up kill him. The fact is they're just hunting him down makes me think there's going to be more to that. But I think that's kind of interesting. And that's why I'm kind of wondering, because I obviously, like, Enoch later on kind of gets all depressed and stuff. It's like, oh, I've been decommissioned. I love it. He says something to Fitz about the dude's blood being like mainly sulfur, and then he slams his head against the table. He looks so depressed and defeated, which is so interesting, because being depressed seems like such a human thing for him to act like that. It's so interesting. But I think for him, it's like, well, let's not forget, Enoch is technically dead in the future as well. So I guess his situation is a little different because he's synthetic, so it's not that big of a deal. But maybe it's also because, well, technically you died in the future, so you are really unnecessary, especially because of, like, the role you, well, because I think it's also because, well, you went above and beyond what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to just observe. You're literally not supposed to take action. So I think that's where potentially things are going to, where things kind of lie with his situation. But I really love, obviously, you have Davis, Simmons, and Daisy all tripping balls. I love it when they start tripping balls, like Daisy and Gemma say at the same time, like, what's happening is like, and, you know, Daisy's like, I'm tripping balls, but Simmons is just like, oh yeah, there must be something in the atmosphere, kind of going about it scientifically. I just love that they said it two different ways, but I love it. It's like, wow, we're tripping balls in space. Did not expect this from a Marvel property, but the fact of the matter is, maybe, you know, I'm not well versed in the comic books, but maybe something like this has happened before, but still, it's just like, this is what's happening in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Like, it's so good. I love it. And I love that they're tripping so much in the whole conversation of just like, oh, the fact of the matter is, what we're here for? The mission. Oh, yeah, ladies' night. And then, like, Simmons sees, like, a little Fitz dressed as a monkey on top of her straw. I'm like, dude, I love this. They're trying to keep their shit together. They're trying to go down the stairs super slow and everything, because it's like, oh, I don't think this is from the atmosphere. It's like, I know, right? It's like, oh, they're chirping so hard. And just like, oh, remember when we first met, you lived in a van and it smelled. Daisy's like, no, it didn't. It's like, yeah. fact is you have big hair and you have big nerd face. It's like, you know, what house are you? And she's totally like Ravenclaw, and just like I love it, and it's even sweet. I love that moment of Daisy being like, "Oh, the fact of the matter is, you know, I forgot what she was saying," and she's touching what she thinks is Simmons, and then she turns into that dude who went on the money. It's like, "Oh, so we going back to your ship or mine?" And Daisy's just kind of like, I love it, dude. And then she crawls under the table. I love that she has that little monologue in her head, like, everyone, or all these people, all these aliens around me, they smell like cheese. I'm like, dude. And she crawls under the table with Simmons, and it's so sweet because her and Simmons have that like heart-to-heart moment. I think it's so adorable. Of like, you know, it's like, oh, the fact is, you know, Simmons is like, I miss Fitz so much, and Daisy's like, oh, that's so sweet. The fact of the matter is, I want a Fitz. I mean, she's like, I don't obviously want Fitz, but you know, Jim was like, oh no, I understand. The fact of the matter is, you have not had good luck with it. I literally laughed. I was like, oh, that's kind of fucked up to say, but it's like, yeah, like things have not worked out for Daisy in many different regards, whether it be the whole Ward situation, which that got complicated on many different levels, the whole situation with Lincoln. Even though she doesn't remember it, there's the whole, you know, Deacon situation too. To be fair, like, Deacon kind of was always kind of like super into her and everything, so, but still, like, I don't know if that was necessarily, she felt 100% that way about him in that regard, but still. But, you know, which is kind of sweet, too, because it's like, oh, you're my best friend. It's like, oh, I love it. It's like, oh, I'm so glad. You know, it's like, it's so adorable. Like, oh, you're my best friend. And they're just like, I know. Like, I love you. It's just like, oh, I love it. It's just, it's something you would see, like, in, like, a, you know, a rom-com or something, or just a comedy in general, just like that drunk moment between friends. Or like, I love you so much. No, I love you more type of situation. And I love it. It's so good. So that, you know, it's just kind of interesting, and it's like, oh, you know, Enoch's sound that he admits that, you know, only humans can hear. It's like, oh, Gemma and, you know, Daisy can hear it. And I love when the time comes, it's like, oh, those Chronicons are there, and like Daisy's blasting one, and it bounces and hits someone else. She's like, wow, I really missed on that. And then she's kind of drunk fighting, which I really liked. It's almost kind of, it kind of reminds me, you know, just, you know, because it's not only media in which I'm familiar with. I'm sure it's like a real thing in real life potentially, but like drunk martial arts, like the Drunken Master, like Jackie Chan movie, that's what it kind of reminded me of, her kind of being a little drunk and just like tripping balls really, but fighting still is pretty dope. And she's like, yeah, but after she wins it back, she's like, God, I hope there's no more, because she almost looks like she's sick and just dizzy. I love that she was on that thing and she was kind of spinning, it started moving, she's spinning a little bit, she's like, whoa, and she's fighting and just I love it, it's so good. And then Simmons has that like moment with the dude at the door and everything, and she's like, yeah, I need to go in there because my future husband is in there. I know because the dolphin told me. And it's like, he's like, you need to stay off those puffs. And she's like, is it that apparent? And he's like, you were literally under the gaming table for like 20 minutes. She's like, it was that long? I love it. At the same time, like, Enoch's still kind of having his pity party, but you know, you have Fitz being like, the fact of the matter is, I don't want to admit this, because you're a major pain in the ass, but you are my best friend. And it's like, oh, that's so sweet, because you could tell before he wasn't really willing to admit it, but like, I think after everything him and Enoch have been through, which is also, once again, it's like what Enoch sacrificed in the future, even though he doesn't remember or know it says a lot. And I just think that's pretty, you know, dope to see that kind of circle back around like that. And the fact is, they even said that line of like, he's like, the fact is, for my best friend, I will do anything. I'm like, that's foreshadowing. And it also, you know, plays in the role, like, he was willing to do anything for I mean, that was for like the greater good of Earth and everything, but still, like, I just thought that was really interesting how that ended up playing out, you know? I also love that Fitz took that dude's arm off and started spreading his blood because it was sulfur, so they could spark it and bring the door down and everything. And that dude being like, the fact is, you don't need to be here, you know? It was almost like sweet, because that, you know, bouncer dude at the door is kind of like, you know, a sweet girl like you shouldn't be in a place like this. And lo and behold, it's like, oh, Fitz and Simmons lock eyes. It's like, yes. I'm like, yeah. That hunter shows up and grabs Fitz. I'm like, I literally was like, That's fucked up. I could not help but scream that. Like, that's so fucked up. Once again, the cosmos will not let these two to be together. I mean, literally, it's turning into a cosmic thing, even more so in this situation, because technically, from a cosmic standpoint, he's not supposed to be alive, and it's kind of throwing off a little bit of the balance of the universe, because things aren't really 100%. Because, like, he had made a point to be like, oh, you guys are out of time. I think he meant that not necessarily in just the literal sense of, like, oh, you're going to die soon. Maybe it did, but it took me a while. Like, I interpreted that at first, but I'm like, oh, he means you guys are literally out of time just because, well, maybe it's supposed to mean a reference to both because they did the whole time travel thing, because this isn't, obviously the way things kind of played out. They were in the future, but now they're back, and it's just, time is it's a whole thing, so, but it's like sucky because they just saw each other, and it's just like, that was taken from them, so it's like, okay, so it's gonna be interesting to see, because obviously Enoch's, there is like, Gemma, you're not supposed to be here, but it's like, okay, you're gonna have to fill him in about everything in the future playing out the way it did, so things are working a little differently. Time is different this time around, so, but that kind of explains why they were attacked, because I was wondering, like, how would they know where to find Fitz and why to attack him? Is because of that aspect, because he's supposed to be dead. Like, they need to kind of rebalance the universe, essentially, So, because there's probably once again going to be like cosmic consequences for things kind of being out of. It might be a thing where it's like it starts off a small tear, but the longer he's alive, the more and more damage he's causing to the cosmos, the universe. So that potentially could be something we see kind of playing out this season. So it's going to be interesting to see if that's where things go. I love Davis tripping so hard. Like at one moment he's just spinning, he's wearing sunglasses and it's colorful and everything. And Piper's like, dude, what the hell is wrong with you? Because apparently Davis had eaten 6 of them where everyone else had eaten 1. So that was really interesting. Yeah, I do love that this entire episode was 100% in space. Like, I guess that's something I'm curious. I guess because that was something I was curious about, like what the structure of this season was going to be like. Like, I guess like it's going to be like half space adventures, half everything on Earth. I mean, eventually it's all going to circle together. I think it's all going to play a role. It's interesting, too, because of the way the episode ends, it goes back to Earth. I was actually kind of surprised, like, we got anything on Earth this episode. But it's whatever it is, the Sarge and Jacko are setting up at the end, like, there's like a map or something, and it's like, oh, I've seen worse, I've seen better. So I'm wondering, is that supposed to be like some ley lines type of stuff of like, yeah, here's these particular marks they need to strike to end up destroying this planet, or whatever it is 100% that they're up to. Like, I guess like what they shot up into the sky was kind of like this like map. Maybe it like pinpoints exactly what they need. So maybe they need to strike or plant something in these specific spots that kind of cause the most damage or something. I don't know. It's interesting, though, like, kind of the whole conversation about, like, obviously, they still take time to appreciate things, because Jaco is kind of like, oh, like, look at how many, stars, and then, Sarge is like, I've seen better, I've seen worse, so the fact is they take in moments like that. Even Pax was like, oh, maybe we should take a break here, I think speaks volumes in itself. Also, I'll bring it up the next time, hopefully I remember to, like, it was something I commented on in a literal comment last episode. Until it pops up, I won't bring it up, in the reviews. But nevertheless, but I'm very excited to see what the next episode has in store for us with all of this. I'm assuming we're going back to Earth, maybe every other. Well, because the first episode was split, the second episode mainly took place on Earth. Second episode was split as well. So this is like the first episode that took place entirely, like 97% in space. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do with the next episode, because everything's kind of picking up speed in both regards. So I'm interested to see where this all takes us going forward into the next episode. What Fitz's fate is going to be. Like I said, I figured it'd be like a thing of like killing him, but maybe it's not that simple with all of this. We'll see. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.